Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's presentation on 2020 HR L&D Trend Survey. My name is David Witt. This is a special broadcast. I'm pleased to be in studio today with Scott Blanchard. Scott Blanchard is the new president of the Ken Blanchard Companies. Scott has a wide variety of experience working with Fortune 500 companies in his early days as a consultant and a trainer for the company. Scott later, over the course of his 25 years, had a long, extensive experience working in our product development department, in our customer service department. Also, Scott started our coaching.com business. And so, Scott, we're very excited to have you here to give us your 4 takeaways on our 2020 L&D survey. And this is a survey for those of you who weren't able to join us last month that we conducted in November with over 800 L&D professionals participated in the survey. Interesting survey. We kind of did it 2 ways. We asked an open-ended question. What is the #1 initiative you're planning to work on in 2020? Right. And we wanted to ask that question early in the survey so that we didn't prejudice it in any way with the different things that we were going to be showing them in our forced ranking. But then we did go ahead and do a forced ranking also. What we're going to share with you today is the results of that survey. On the next slide, just so you'll have this built into the recording of today's presentation, and there will be a recording. I also want to let you know if at any time, and this is good practice on this slide, you can always, of course, make your slide bigger, the image on your slide bigger, just by dragging any of the corners in the viewer that you're looking at. And you'll see Scott's complete bio here. But let's dig in and talk a little bit about today's agenda, and then I'll share some more information about the survey. We'll talk a little bit about the survey background and structure. We'll be talking about a high-level summary of the results. We'll be talking about actionable strategies, and then we'll be sharing some ways about how you can get started today. Here's some of the demographics of the HR Learning and Talent Development Trend Survey. Again, it was conducted the first 2 weeks of November, just 2 months ago. We had 822 respondents, and here's the functional area of the respondents. So you can see it predominantly came from the learning and development space, but people also identify that they were in leadership development, training and development, organizational development, and then you'll see 12% identified as human resources and 11% as talent management and development. The survey consisted of preset responses and open text questions. And Scott, I want to share with you and get your take on, here's the first of the 4 structured questions we asked and the set list of possibilities. And as you take a look at this, at what's on this screen, what are some of the things that stick out for you?
Well,
oh, wait. And it's actually on this another one.
Let's here we go right here,
Yeah.
I mean, obviously, the top one right there.
The whole idea of managing change, yeah.
Yeah, you know, we've been hearing this so much, and sort of like the 4 top ones are really connected. Managing change, you know, #1, because, you know, the world is you know, not only fundamentally changing, but there's been a lot of acceleration recently, and a lot of the changes that have been happening, especially related to the internet, have accelerated over the last 5 years, and they've really they've affected everything, especially in the learning and development world. And what was a concern, you know, many years ago around how the internet's going to begin to affect learning and that sort of thing has really, you know, accelerated. And also, it's really affecting the employee experience. And it's really connected to attracting great talent, especially with our kind of historic, you know, low unemployment rates. And then the last one is, you know, a little bit connected, but it's really about the notion of alignment and collaboration, because, you know, one of the central issues with change is where are we headed, and how can we all get moving in the same direction and be kind of collaborating and cooperating and helping each other versus, you know, spending time worried about our own kind of resistance to change. So those things seem to be really, you know, sort of related, you know, specifically to me. Anyway, that's my kind of my initial thoughts when I looked at it.
That's great. And again, we'll provide you with a copy of the results so that you can take a look at all the different areas that people identified as important and key. Now what we wanted to do is, in addition to asking people a question about what they were focusing on at a overall level, we asked them specifically, what about people development in particular?
Right.
And so we went a little bit more granular. And in this section of the survey, we asked them the question two different ways, and I'm excited to share this data with you. I think you'll find this interesting. So we asked them, which of the following people development challenges is most concerning to you in 2020? And you'll see here we used a 6-point scale, everywhere from not at all concerning to concerning at the fullest extent, and that's a 6-point scale. So you'll see here the rankings of the different items that we asked them. As you look at this, Scott, and considering that you founded coaching.com, the coaching services here at Blanchard, you're probably not surprised to see coaching so high and the desire to teach their leaders to be more coach-like at the top of this list. What's your experience in terms of coaching skills, and does that surprise you, or is that like as expected?
It really doesn't surprise me at all. So it's been an interesting thing to watch what's happened over the last 20 years. And I'm going to refer to 20 years specifically because, we started our coaching practice here in the beginning of 2000. And coaching was very small at that point. It was interesting. It was exciting. It was sort of like showing up. And now about 85% of large organizations use coaching in one way or another. So it's ubiquitous. It's everywhere, and one of the things where people used to not understand what coaching really is, one of the things that I think people really understand is that being more coach-like and actually using a coach is really somebody that's actually helping you through a focused sort of a conversation, create an environment where you can actually create insights and move to more purposeful action.
Yep.
And what people want from their manager is they want less of a manager. Less of a cop, less of somebody that's going to be holding them accountable. And what they really want is somebody that's going to facilitate their own development, finding ways to align themselves more purposefully with their job to create a more meaningful workplace. And then a lot of the things that are required in terms of managing change is managing, emotion and concern and fear, and worry. And coaching has really been found to be really, really effective to help people sort of acknowledge, grapple with, and understand what's happening from an affective standpoint, how they're feeling, and then ultimately say, and so what am I going to do now? Yeah. Because that's what's different between coaching, and consulting or even a therapeutic approach is it's really about, given everything that's happened so far, what is the best choice that we can make moving forward that's going to create the greatest outcomes for me personally and professionally. And so I think people really want to have a manager who, sure, they manage and they provide the resources that are necessary in the direction, but that when we get into these situations that are more, challenging or emotional, that the manager is not dictating, and what they're really doing is helping people through a process find the most effective path possible. So people just want a more approachable coach-like manager. Bingo.
Makes a lot of sense. Take a look at number 2 on this list. People are wanting to address the L&D professionals. They want to prepare for leadership gaps, and they want to create leadership bench strength. Why now more than ever, would you say?
Well, there's a couple of things. I think one of the things that people are looking for is, and it's really clear when you look at the engagement data and what's important with people and newer generations coming into work, is people are looking for more approachable, collaborative managers, number one. And the other thing is we're having unprecedented, shifts and changes in demographics, and many organizations that we're working with, they have bench strength issues, meaning they don't have quite enough managers to actually fill the shoes or that they have. And so that's one issue. And many of the managers they have, a lot of organizations don't believe that they're fully equipped to meet the challenges of the new workforce.
Yep.
And also of this new world. And so it's really about how do we create more purpose-driven, more skilled, more effective leaders. So it's a combination of better leadership, but also kind of more, more of them. So that gap is a big issue that we're seeing, kind of everywhere. A lot of organizations are also making the choice, is it better to move forward in this tight labor market understaffed? Or is it better off to, plug in whoever you can get to fill the role? And we've had a lot of clients that are trying to figure that one out. And if you go out into the market and try to hire managers who are equipped and ready to come in, boy, it's a tough proposition to find, the kind of talent that you need. So what that leads to is that we have to look internally to create our future leaders here within the organization. So there's a lot more movement and idea that we need to develop our talent and our bench inside, partly because there's not as much talent available on the outside, or if it is, it's hard to get a hold of. And the other thing is that leaders that come in, especially in the middle and the higher levels in an organization from another organization, there's a higher risk factor that they may not meld with the culture, especially initially. Yeah. And so a lot of times, if people are promoted from within, it's much more likely that they're going to work well within the culture.
God, it makes a lot of sense, especially when you've got, you need the time pressures on. You've got to get things done now. It's probably more time effective to go ahead and develop the folks that you've got on staff already. Yep. They've got a leg up on it. Yep. Take a look on items 3, 4, and 5 here on this list, which is kind of interesting. As far as when people look at who they want to train, they're talking about training their teams. They're talking about training their frontline leaders, and they're talking about training their mid-level leaders. I know you've got been kind of talking about the importance of training the heart of the house. This sort of feels like that a little bit, that folks are kind of identifying where the action's at in their organization.
The frontline leaders, the mid-level leaders, the teams, there's a really important progression there. And so one of the Dave and I have done it. We've done different presentations, and we've in this company, in our company, the last 5 or 6 years ago, we've been focusing a lot on some of the issues related to the first-time manager. Yep. Because there's been so many people that have been baby boomers that have retired, and a lot of people stepping into their first role. And there's some really interesting challenges when people get into that first role. And one of them, fundamentally, is most people in that first role in management, they fail to achieve the results that they would like and the organization would like within the first 2 years, right? And so there's a larger number of people than we would like that actually fail in the first 2 years to kind of get off to a good start. Yep. And then the other piece around that is it's no surprise because a lot of times people receive very little training into that first job, which is a very big transition into your first management job. And there was a study that was done at Harvard that was really interesting, and it really said the first 2 years are critical because the habits that a manager develops in their first 2 years as a leader, they become basically one of two things. They either become a foundation from which a manager begins to build a strong career as a manager, an effective manager, or they develop habits.
Bad habits.
Bad habits, which this is the language that was used, which hobble them for years afterwards. And so if you don't get off to a good start, you can really bring into trouble, which then leads to, then we don't have as many people that are ready to move to those mid-level leader positions, which usually is like 2 to 6 years after you take that first position. And then the other piece that's really important that's kind of mixed in there at the front line and then also at that middle manager level is that a lot of our work is done in teams, in groups, in collaboration. And one of the skills that's really important is how do I manage myself? That's one story. How do I manage you if you're working for me? But then how do I manage and work with these teams that are everywhere? And what's interesting around the research around teams is that teams do not become high performing just naturally. And most teams have a significant struggle, usually in the beginning to a third of the way through kind of their life. And what effective management can do is it can help reduce the amount of time frame that a team exists in this stage that we call, it's communicating through conflict. There's always some sort of conflict or a mix of expectations that has to be sorted out before a team goes ahead and produces. And so team leadership, frontline leadership, mid-level leadership, bench, people being more coach-like, it's all sort of really connected as a very similar trend. of the group of trends.
Scott referenced two pieces of research that we're going to have a way for you to access this research at the end. The Harvard research on first-time managers, that's by Professor Linda Hill, and we'll send you a link where you can actually take a look and get that data and see with that article. The other one that will help you with accessing is Scott talked a little bit about the research that we did around teams. We did that together with Training Magazine, and we'll provide a reference and a resource so that you can get to that also. Hey, Scott, take a look on this next part. This is actually a three-part graph. It's really a chart, I guess. The next question we asked is, in addition to which of the following are most concerning to you in 2020, we asked people, to what degree would you consider yourself effective in this area? Now, again, just back to this 6-point scale that we used. The 3 in the 6-point scale meant to some extent, and you'll see that in small print there at the bottom. So people are saying that in terms of being effective in these first 5 and the rest of them on this list, they say that right now they would evaluate themselves as only somewhat effective. Is that your experience also in talking with clients? I mean, would you say that most clients, even though they recognize these areas as being important, don't really have the strategies and the programs in place to address them at this point?
Oh, it's absolutely, true.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you can think about, yourself, your own experience within your own organization is, at best, you have a bell-shaped curve in terms of people's satisfaction and alignment with their manager. You have a small number of people that feel like their manager is really effective, right? And then you've got a kind of a bunch of people in the middle that sort of like there's some good things and there's some bad things, and then there's a pretty decent number of people that really have kind of a lack of respect and trust in their manager to help them, not only produce winning results, but also to have a rewarding experience at work.
Yeah.
And so again and again, we see that, and we also see it because, some organizations, probably not the organizations that you all work for, but some organizations fail to train their managers effectively and to hold those managers accountable and provide them with support that can enable them to succeed as a manager in today's world.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's it's a problem. It's one of the things that leads to many organizations having, fundamental issues with engagement and kind of a lack of trust in their direct supervisor and then the management above.
Got it. One of the things that's interesting about this little chart of different attributes is I bet some of the detail-oriented people in the audience were probably trying to figure out what the ranking was here. And even they probably said, well, that first thing sort of is the ranking from most important, but I want to show you what the real ranking is here, and it's in this third column.
Uh-huh.
We did a little bit of work here to do the math for you, and you'll see that when you look at it, the way this is ranked is actually the size of the gap. And so I guess the opportunity is really in those first 5 when you look that you've got a 1.64, a 1.5, a 1.4, and then a 1.3 gap between the importance and the current level of effectiveness. So a lot of work to be done there. Do you think this is a good approach? Is this the way that you might take a look if you were working with a client, Scott? Would you have them use this as kind of marching orders or at least a place for an audit?
I would, and I'll give you just a couple reasons, why is we've consistently seen over the years in the multi-raters and the 360s that we've done, and also the employee, assessments of their management, a gap between the intentions or the, kind of what the manager believes that they're doing and the way that their people are perceiving, and receiving it. And so most managers or many managers feel like they are a better manager than their people perceive them to be.
Oh, okay.
And so that's one thing.
Yeah.
Also, most organizations perceive that their management is in better shape than the employees actually are experiencing. So that's another gap. And one of the other ones that's really interesting is the higher you go in an organization, and this is shown by research, the least accurate your perceptions are about what people are thinking and feeling at the front line.
Yeah.
And as the organization grows larger, it's less likely that the senior managers have an accurate perception of what's happening at the front line. And then the other one that's interesting is the older you are,
yeah,
right,
yeah,
the more likely it is that you have a not only an inaccurate but a more positive view of the way things are than they actually are by the people that are lower in the ranks and younger.
That is so interesting.
And so it's a really interesting dynamic that's a new piece that I just kind of read recently. I'm not sure if I'd share that with you, but actually, as people get into their, like I'm 54. Okay, so when you start getting into your 40s, 50s, and into your 60s, there's this sort of effect that happens over your life where you put less weight on what people are feeling and thinking, and you have more of a, it's not a jaded view, you actually get more of a false positive view in terms of what's happening, and so it's a really interesting dynamic, and so I actually feel like it makes sense on a lot of different reasons that the gap is there. In the center of our leadership profit chain framework and model, the operational leadership. There's two kinds of leadership in every organization. There's strategic leadership, which is about vision, direction, establishing, managing values, determining the strategy of the organization, kind of where are we headed, and operational leadership, which is that leadership that's there every day to make things happen, from the top of the organization, kind of all the way down. And operational leadership is the linchpin of success in every organization. Because and you'll see it in the leadership profit chain here.
It's coming up, yeah.
Yeah. So there's no surprise, to us, and it's one of the reasons why, we feel great about the work we do, and also the possibility, because there's an ample, and large market of organizations and people that could really benefit from having better leadership in place. And what's interesting is, in order to have better leadership in place, it's a constant battle. It's a constant pursuit. Sort of like my weight, right? I'm either getting heavier or I'm getting lighter. Right now, it's after the beginning of the year. I'm actually on my...
Hopefully not heavier now.
No, I'm lightening up, right? There's not that many holiday meals. And so it's really true with leadership capacity in organizations. Is those companies that achieve high levels of performance from their managers, they're never satisfied. They're constantly investing in people, raising the bar, and moving in that direction. And organizations that kind of pull up and kind of let things flow, or they're not actively making good things happen, what happens is naturally that capacity and kind of the alignment between all the managers begins to decline.
You mentioned this idea of the employee work passion, leadership profit chain. We're going to come up to that. Let me set that up a little bit, because that is... kind of became very evident again when we started to look at the results that came from the open-ended data that we asked. You saw earlier that we had 822 people participate in the open-ended part. They actually some of them gave us more than one response. That's why we had 900 open-ended responses. And we're going to talk about the 4 key takeaways that you'll be sharing are the importance of the customer experience, the importance of the employee experience, the importance of leadership development, and then the focus that L&D professionals are putting on design initiatives. So the number one takeaway, and this is an actual word cloud from all the responses of the people who were identifying organizational initiatives, and I think anybody who would look at this, the two big words that pop out of this thing are customer and growth. And that's what the L&D professionals were saying in the open-ended responses. When they were looking at an organizational strategy, the number one key takeaway from that data was they were looking to impact business growth through an enhanced customer experience, which I think is interesting, because I know customer experience has been something that you've been talking about is critical in today's organizations.
Absolutely. So, what's interesting about the customer experience, and I actually was speaking with a senior leader today in a government agency, a federal government agency. And what's interesting is every single organization has a set of customers, or in the government agency standpoint, a set of interested constituents that have to be served, right? And what we say in the customer side of things is a couple. One is 100% of the revenue, at least in our company, comes from our customers. And in today's world with the internet and the ability for customers to learn it so much and also to talk and share their opinions and everything like that, customers have a lot of information and they have a lot of things that they can do if they're not feeling great about how they're being served.
Yeah.
Mostly they can either put pressure on the company.
Yep.
Or the other thing is they can find another provider.
It's easy these days.
Yeah, and so customer growth is customer growth, the customer experience really, really, really fundamentally kind of important, and it's an inside-out proposition. Extraordinary customer experience doesn't come just from hoping it's going to happen. So why don't we go to the leadership profit chain? I want to talk about some of the dynamics. So one of the things that we have been working on for like 15 years, and we've been evolving this framework over time, is leadership interacts with performance and with the customer and the employee experience in a very specific manner. And so one of the things that we have here, and then we walk through a couple points around the leadership profit chain, is most executives would have trouble disagreeing with the idea that great leadership is something that they would like to have in their business.
Right.
Right? I mean, who can really argue with great, purposeful, inspiring leadership that helps drive an organization forward? There's no doubt about it. But one of the issues is there's a lot of organizations that are perceived as having great leadership from top to bottom. And there's a lot of organizations that kind of want to or are stuck in the middle, but they haven't, their leadership is holding them back in some way. And so one of the things that we did in this study is what we did is we wanted to not only define why is leadership important, but we also want to talk about how does leadership specifically work to create organizational value. Mm-hmm. And so with success and what were the dynamics. And the first thing we did is looked at 210 studies related to this, and we've been continuing to look at new studies that are helping support or refute or kind of shine a light towards this framework. Mm-hmm. And so the first thing that we found in the center is, as I mentioned before, is there's two kinds of leadership. There's strategic leadership and there's operational leadership. The strategic leadership is what is the vision for the organization? What kind of culture are we creating and maintaining through our values? And what kind of short-term initiatives are we working on that are strategic imperatives, the short-term things we're doing for the next couple of years? Leadership is very important, but if you look at the graph, there's a gray broken line between strategic leadership and the top, which is organizational vitality, which is the measures around long-term organization success. Mm-hmm. So what we found is strategic leadership does not have a direct influence on organization success. Huh. Go tell your CEO that. Okay, but what it does is it's a foundation for the success of an organization, because strategic leadership actually, what it does in the positive is it creates more aligned, animated, positive organization or operational leadership. Mm-hmm. But its operational leadership is the linchpin of success, because the operational leadership in the organization has a huge impact on employee work passion, mm-hmm. which is that bucket that we kind of call the employee experience, and on customer devotion. So in the research, the customer is really interesting. There's three things that influence and can cause a customer to be devoted to your business or your organization or not. One is satisfaction, were they satisfied with their most recent experience? Mm-hmm. If you took a flight somewhere, did you like the flight? Did your bag get there on time? Was the flight on time? Were people nice and pleasant? Mm-hmm. Was the place clean? It's like, was it a good flight? Second one is loyalty. When I go on my next trip, am I going to go with that airline, or is never again? Mm-hmm. Right? Or am I only going to go if I get a special deal? Right? So that's number two, which is loyalty. And the third is advocacy, which is the degree that I'm going to say positive or negative things to people that I want to talk to about mm-hmm. it. Right? And so satisfaction, loyalty, and advocacy, those are the three things that really matter with the customer. And what's interesting is when organizations say that they're really trying to improve their business through an enhanced customer experience, there's really two things that have to happen to make that work. The first is the employees that are serving the customer need to be prepared and aligned to deliver the best possible service to the customers.
Yeah.
But then additionally, you can see there's a lineup. The operational leadership needs to be specifically equipped and aligned to create that customer experience as well. And the reason why is because when things go poorly, that's when managers intervene, right? If you're having a meal with your family and things aren't going well, right, and you can't get anywhere with a waiter, what are you going to do?
Let me see.
You're going to talk to the manager,
yeah,
right? If you have, so you rarely do deal with just the frontline person when things go badly, and it's the manager that has that ability to fix things, to make things right beyond what that server may have. And so the management is very, very responsible for kind of the customer experience. So those two things have to come together. So it's a great thing. We've seen a lot of companies that are trying to work on that. And then one last thing I just have to mention up here. Mm-hmm. Organizational vitality, by our definition, is in order for an organization to be successful today, different than 20 years ago, is there's 4 bottom lines that you need to deliver on. One is you need to be perceived as a financially sound organization.
Okay.
That if you're running the California Fire Service or if you're running a corporation or a small business, you have to be financially sound.
Yep.
Number 2 is there's a measure of the customer experience and reputation that is incredibly important, because if the customers are not feeling satisfied and you have a poor customer reputation, that's missing the mark.
Yep.
Okay. The third one is the employee experience, the internal engagement experience, which is so important, but it's also the external employment brand. And organizations that are perceived as poor employers, they continue to be poor employers because they can't even get good employees to actually come join the organization. Right. So it's a really interesting deal. And then the last one, which is so important, is being a steward. And because of the advent of the internet and corporate social responsibility and so many pressures, as organizations now cannot be perceived as a black hat.
Right.
You have to be perceived as doing good things in your community and the world. And that's why so many organizations are spending a lot of time trying to demonstrate to the public that they are actually trying to do good in the world, no matter what industry that they're in. And so the customer experience is key, but you can't achieve a customer experience that's really strong without strong operational leadership, which influences the employees, because the employees have a huge imprint on the customer.
It's interesting you talk about that whole employee experience, because that was actually called out as key takeaway number 2, that L&D professionals are focused on enhancing the employee experience to attract and retain key talent. I think you've made a good case. If you're focused on improving your customer service, you've got to improve that employee experience also. And I know you've got a couple of slides here that we'll get to in a second about how that actually happens, what's the process. But here's, I wanted to share some data for all of the L&D professionals and HR professionals on with us today. So 17% of the survey respondents said they'll be focusing on the employee experience in 5 broad categories. And here's what they are. You can see number 1, the largest category is development. But there's also a lot of work being done around engagement. That's still important. Retention, specifically hiring, attracting good people, and then productivity to some degree also. As a part of that employee appraisal process, Scott, I know you've got a 5-step process that kind of helps to explain how the people generate perceptions of whether this is a good place to work and deserving of their best efforts. And it starts with this whole idea of appraisals of the work environment. Can you take us through this 5-step process?
Sure. So what's interesting about engagement, and as it's evolved over the last 25 years.
Yep.
Engagement first showed up in the literature in 1989.
Yeah.
And it was in the late 90s that
Marcus
Buckingham and Kirk Kaufman, they came out with First Break All the Rules, which is when it really hit the, and so engagement has been kind of looked at a lot. And what's interesting is there's been kind of 2 seasons or 2 periods of engagement. And the first one was this whole idea that people that are engaged stay longer, they work harder, they serve the customer better, they're more cooperative, all these great things that happen when they're engaged. And so we had a lot of clients that were measuring engagement. But then one of the things that they found is when they went back to try to improve engagement, a lot of times they actually didn't see improved performance.
Hard to move the needle.
It was hard to move. So what's happened over the last 7 or 8 years is we found out that there's a key in there, which is one of the things that we measure, which is not so much how do I feel, but it's like what conclusions do I make from that? That's what matters the most. So let me explain. So appraisals of work environments. So there's basically employees. There's three categories that they evaluate when it comes to their environment. And you do it, I do it. It's how do we appraise what's happening. As human beings, we're constantly scanning our environment for what's going on. So one of them is, who am I working for? What is the firm that I'm working for? And so that's a really important thing. So it's the organization variables. That's where people judge things like fairness, procedural fairness and distributive fairness, collaboration. Those things are really job advancement, the ability to advance through the organization. Those are things where people hold the organization kind of accountable for it, right? The quality of leadership, the belief that people have in the organization and senior leadership. It all falls into like, who am I working for? So if that's positive, great. If it's negative, not so good. If it's in the middle, that can be an issue. The second one is the actual job that people are doing. Is their work meaningful? Do they have the tools and ability to get the job done? Do they have a reasonable amount of task variety? Is there inherent kind of fairness between what they do and what other people are asked to do? Is the job, is it meaningful?
Yeah.
Which is really key. If I don't see my job as meaningful, it's really hard to be engaged, right? And then the third one is the relationships that I have with two important groups. One is my manager, and the second is my coworker. Okay, and my manager is really important because I work for my manager, and they have the ability to reward me and sanction me, and they may even have the ability to fire me, or give me a promotion. So there's all sorts of things related to that. But there's also my coworkers. And so if you work for a great manager, but you have a toxic or an unsafe relationship with your coworkers, it's not good, right? And so the human factors really matter. And so what we have in this framework and in this model is people are appraising their job, they're appraising the organization they work for, and they're appraising those important relationships. And so what happens then is people make a conclusion, which we call a sense of well-being. And so based on all of that stuff that I'm scanning, here are the three things that people kind of conclude. Am I safe? Do I feel physically, and emotionally safe? That's why there's been a lot of psychological safety work recently. Yeah. The second one is, do I feel valuable? Do I feel connected to other people in the organization, my manager and my coworkers? Really hard to go to work when you don't feel connected. And then the last thing is, do I feel like I'm being useful? Am I producing results that give me, satisfaction? And so those three factors is what we call the sense of well-being. And if people have a positive sense of well-being across those factors, what ends up happening is they draw positive conclusions and they develop positive intentions to do above average work, to give discretionary energy, to be a good citizen, to stay with the company, and to endorse the company. So, and what happens is the intentions are the things that correlate really tightly against winning job-related behaviors and organization-related behaviors, and then create a position where we create positive results. So let me dig into these intentions a little bit more. And so the reason that it's so important for employees to have a good experience is because a good experience with their manager, with their coworkers, with the organization, with their job, what it does is it creates an environment where people have the ability to access these five intentions. One is do I intend to perform at an above average level? Meaning when I come to work during the day, do I know and do I intend to do as good a job as I can, or do I, am I not worried about that? The second one is do I intend to use my discretionary energy or effort on behalf of the organization? So do I say, even though I'm scheduled to go home and there's something else going on, do I have the ability to bring in my own kind of will to get something done and push through some barrier? Like, do I bring my whole self? The third one is, do I intend to stay with the organization for the foreseeable future? If I believe that I'm not going to stay and I'm looking for a job, what happens is people move into a short-timer mentality and they're not nearly as committed to the work, right? And then the second to last one, which is, do I have the intention to endorse the organization and its leadership, which leads to all sorts of issues around a positive relationship with the organization, a positive relationship as an employer. And, when I feel great about the organization, then I tend to endorse it. Or do I tend to slander or say bad things about the organization? And then the last one is, do I intend to cooperate? do I intend to be a positive organization, citizen in the business, or am I going to spend more energy protecting myself or potentially protecting my people inside of my smaller unit? So these intentions that we've been measuring, these really, really are strong because those are the things that correlate with people working harder because they want to, producing better results, using all the energy, cooperating and staying with the organization and saying great things. So it's really important. So the science is basically saying engagement is not a nice to have, but here's what happens is if your staff, if you have like three different groups, you've got people that are fully in, fully engaged, ready to go.
Mm-hmm.
Tremendous economic value from them. You get people in the middle, mixed bag, and then you get some good and some bad, maybe a little bit of friction.
This is that 60%, right?
But then the people that are actively disengaged, as Buckingham and Coffin call them, are people that have low employee engagement and low intentions. Those people actually either leave or by staying, they start to do damage to the organization because their attitude spreads to other people. And so what happens is organizations they kind of get what they deserve in terms of the way their employees behave. And management is a very large part of it, but there's other factors that we mentioned before that have to be addressed.
Well, the good news is the third thing that L&D professionals identified in the survey in the open-ended section was a renewed focus on leadership development. And here's the key. They specifically, when they did call out who they were going to focus on, it was going to be on frontline and mid-level managers. Take a look on this next graph. You'll actually see what are the areas that the HR L&D professionals in the open-ended text portion of the survey identified. Again, we're seeing some nice corroboration here with those coaching skills. Look at the percentage of people, 33% identifying coaching skills as what they want to develop in their frontline and mid-level people. But then emotional intelligence is second, performance management skills, interesting, is third, talent management is fourth, kind of related to that, and then people management is in that fifth spot. So you're seeing this heavy emphasis on results with a huge component of coaching people to be better with some emotional intelligence. I'm guessing not too surprising from your standpoint. Take a look when we asked folks a similar question, but where we gave them a preset list of responses. I always love this. This comes up over and over again in the executive briefings. We did all these executive briefings with servant leadership. We asked people, what is a servant leader? The thing they always came up with is the person who's a good listener.
Yeah.
And then they always identify they're also strong at coaching. They build trust. They create an engaged workforce. Here we are again on that 6-point scale. And you'll see that 4 corresponds with a great extent. The HR and L&D professionals, there's a lot of things they want their leaders to be. But you can see the top of the list.
It's interesting. I was having a conversation with one of our founders here who's been really involved in the research, and we were both basically saying, again and again and again, coming back like a bad penny, is that organizations need and people want leaders that are more cooperative, more collaborative, that they listen deeply, they provide coaching, they build trust. And in fact, one of the things that we found that's really interesting is the number one thing that correlates with the intentions that I mentioned before.
Yeah,
is the degree to which I actually have trust in my manager, or I perceive my manager to be an other-focused manager.
Yeah,
versus a manager that I don't trust and that I perceive to be self-oriented. And with that, if my manager has my back, all sorts of good things happen. If my manager does not have my back and I feel like I'm unsafe around them, then I'm going to protect myself. So it's all connected to the same thing. And so why don't we get to the next takeaway, because we're kind of getting near the end and we want to make sure that we offer a little bit of time for Q&A.
You bet. The fourth takeaway was that over 51% of the HR and L&D professionals said they were going to be involved in designing some sort of an initiative in their organization. Now, it's a varied list. Hold on to your seats a little bit, because this is quite a colorful pie chart you're going to see next, because people identified 18 different initiatives, but there's a couple of standouts here on the list. So take a look at this just for a second. The bulk of the initiatives that HR and L&D professionals are planning to do in 2020, you'll see that 20% are around e-learning. And I think that's not too surprising. 11% focus on curriculum design. So they're going to try to put together the curriculum that'll help those frontline and mid-level leaders. Then coming in third, specifically calling out agile change management. Remember earlier at the very beginning of this presentation, we talked about managing change is number one. It looks like they've figured out that they're going to have to design some sort of agile change management program. Next is this whole idea of team development. So that's definitely, we've talked about the importance of teams. And then in the fifth spot, we've got alignment. So as you look at this, I think interesting. I know you've got some kind of some thoughts as far as on each of these areas. Maybe you could take us through these first five, Scott, and just any thoughts that you have on numbers 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 on this.
Well, so let me talk about the e-learning thing. So we're seeing this again and again. So on one hand, we've got this tremendous need for managers to be more effective top to bottom, right?
Yep.
And then on the other hand, we've got this opportunity for organizations to say, can we make good use of these incredible e-learning assets and all this online digital componentry to create an experience that will actually help move the needle on managers' ability without feeling like the only way to improve management is to take them off the job and put them in these costly classroom training sessions. And so almost every one of our clients, they're struggling with the two. And we've had clients that have gone 100% e-learning, and they've been disappointed, right? Because they have great stuff, but people don't tend to access it. They have low utilization rates, but then they also have a kind of a lack of cascading alignment down through the company that comes from everybody kind of going through the same experience. And so e-learning is still central more than ever. And also, everybody has these. Right, so the big question is, how can we use these phones, to actually begin to consume e-learning? And everybody's got this dream that people are they're gonna go after e-learning like they do, their email or their Instagram feed on their phone when they're like in a waiting room, right? And so it's interesting. The e-learning piece is kind of key. And I think what's cool to me is that e-learning is sort of it's like connecting to curriculum design. And how do we take the e-learning componentry? How do we take the classrooms? How do we take other facilitated experiences? How do we mix in coaching? How do we mix all these pieces together to create a more modern curriculum design that's an experience and not a training program? Mm-hmm. And so one of the things we've been doing as an industry and as a company is we've been producing and selling, great training programs. And we've been talking about this, but what people really want is they want learning experiences. And an experience is something that occurs over time that helps kind of people, build some momentum in terms of what we're doing. So in one client after another, we're really talking about how those two pieces together. And then the other piece that, of course, comes together is how can we, enable change, but also how can we create agility? How can we create agility in learning? How can we have more agile managers? So agility keeps kind of showing up, and agility comes from, really good design, and it comes from really good education. And it comes from giving people the tools that they need, so they can be more flexible. And then the team piece, which is so interesting, is how can we develop these teams in this crazy world? And a lot of the themes and teams is how can we create a more flexible, more adaptable, more collaborative, more agile team. Yeah. Because the promise of the team is that the team can come together and create better coverage and flexibility than really an individual can. And then, of course, as my father always said, and everybody struggles with this, is all leadership starts with clear goals and alignment. Yeah. And what's so hard with alignment is even if you get a hold of what you're trying to align around, by the time you kind of get it through the whole system, it probably changes. Yeah. And so alignment is even more of a dynamic kind of function. So it's a really interesting world these days because what's happening again and again is people are trying to we have this huge need for people to learn how to work better together, better management, better employee experience, better customer experience. How can we all kind of raise our game and become better? Yep. We've got all these digital assets, all these learning tools, all this technology that's available. How can we bring those two things together? We've got organizations that need to adapt. Therefore, we need all these things. And everybody's trying to step their game up. Yeah, they have to. There's just no doubt about that. And so I guess the last piece that we're going to kind of finish with here, and I say we just do this last slide. Yeah, let's just take it. No matter what happens, and this is the thing that I worked on quite a while ago, and we've been teaching this and using this as a framework with our clients. Is at the end of the day, most L&D professionals want to create training and development investments and initiatives that work.
Yep.
And one of the things that's interesting is they don't work just because of the quality of the instructional experience or design. They work as it relates to the larger system. And so what we have here are 5 things that need to be considered and dealt with in order for success to occur. So the way we got to this is we studied our clients that were achieving the greatest amount of success and tangible value from the investments that they were making in their learning and development programs.
Yep.
And the clients that reported the best impact or results or value, these were the 5 things that were happening. They had top management who understood what they were doing. Mm-hmm. They weren't passive. They were actively involved in what was going on. The strategic initiative thing, that was checked. The learning was aligned and connected to where the organization was going and its priorities. Leadership that is off to the side or training that's off to the side that's not connected, big trouble. We have a couple opportunities here, connecting leadership to the customer experience, to the employee experience, and to the organization succeeding in those markets. Perfect. If that connection is made, really good. Another piece, and this is more of a mechanic, is that event-based learning doesn't work very well. You need to follow up and reinforce in order for things to really work. Learning must create and demonstrate at some point results, which we call tangible value. Mm-hmm. And then the last piece, and this is connected to that design situation, is and if you want to make learning and development make a difference, it's got to be systematically delivered so people understand why they're there, what they're learning, how it's going to help them personally and professionally, how it's going to help the business. They need to learn new stuff in a respectful way. They need to have ample opportunities to practice. And then ultimately, we need to have a process of follow-up and reinforcement over time. And the organizations that do that much more systematically, like within a rhythm, versus sporadically and in spurts, mm-hmm. are the organizations that are rewarded. And what's interesting is, it really is true that learning organizations are the ones that are succeeding and will succeed moving forward.
Well, Scott, we are just about at the end of our time today, and I want to give people an opportunity to be followed up with and be able to access some of the resources that you've talked about. We've discussed a lot about different research that you've talked about at Harvard through Training Magazine, the others focused research, even the 5 points to making sure you get the most out of your training initiative. All of those are available as Blanchard articles and ebooks. We've got links to all of that. In the poll that you're looking at right now, go ahead and choose, and you can choose more than one. If you'd like links to the articles and ebooks, all the background research that Scott's talked about, go ahead and choose that. If you would like an invitation to our February webinar, we're going to be talking about creating learning journeys.
Nice.
Yeah, so if you'd like an invite to that February webinar, go ahead and choose the second option also. If you have got an initiative and Scott has kind of piqued your interest as far as, wow, I'd like to talk more about that. I'd like to hear about what other Blanchard clients have done. If you'd like to discuss your initiative at no charge, we can have an initial consultation with you. Go ahead and choose the third one there. Once you've made your choices, any combination, hit the submit button. That'll send your responses to us, and we'll be able to follow up with you. Since we are at the end of our time, I want to give you all an email address to send your questions to. And Scott and I will sort through the questions, and we'll make sure that either Scott's able to answer those directly himself, or we'll forward them to other folks in the organization who might be more in charge of that. That email address is webinars, that's plural, webinars@kenblanchard.com. If you send a question to webinars@kenblanchard.com, we'll go ahead and get you a personal answer. And sometimes that's helpful if you were talking about something specific to your company. Scott, as we wrap up today's session, and we've covered a lot today, if there was one thing that you would hope that folks would remember walking away from today's session, what would it be?
I think the biggest thing is that in our organizations, one of the things that's really clear to me is we sort of get what we created, or we get what we deserve, to a certain degree. And I think so many organizations are really interested in moving their organizations and their cultures forward because through improving the capacity of their leadership because they're concerned. You know, it's real easy to look inside of almost any company and say, boy, there's some areas that we need to get better in. But then when you begin to look outside and what's happening in the world, it's really easy to be concerned that our company could become passed by if we don't watch out. And so there's a really heightened interest in how do we create a more agile, more nimble, more kind of learning focused, more dynamic organization. And I think the answer, you know, is squarely in the world of learning and development. And it's an incredibly important job. And yet in some companies, it's seen as a staff function or something that's not, you know, fundamentally critical. And we just disagree with that. So we really, you know, we believe in learning and development as a strategic advantage, as a strategic opportunity, as a differentiator, as a linchpin to success. And we would love any opportunity to help you along any part of your journey, again, through sharing kind of information or engaging in dialogue with you. We're just convinced, and our clients that we've been working with forever are convinced that, you know, great leadership development, great learning, it just leads to great results inside of organizations.
Well, Scott, thank you for your time today to take us through your takeaways from the 2020 HR L&D survey. It's really been fun and enlightening to hear your perspective on all of these.
Cool. Well, thanks, Dave. And thanks, everybody. Have a wonderful day.
Yeah, thanks for joining us. We hope to see you again at another Blanchard webinar or event sometime in the near future. That does conclude today's presentation.